In 2017, Reggie and Agatha Cooper arrived at their retirement gift, a luxury glass cabin deep in the Wisconsin wilderness, expecting nothing more than peaceful birdwatching. But as darkness fell on their first night, Reggie's buried childhood terror clawed its way back to the surface. Something was watching them through those transparent walls. Something that had been waiting 60 years for his return. This is Agatha's account of the night that they discovered that some childhood nightmares never truly end, and why that glass cabin was permanently removed from all rental listings. Once my husband Reggie retired, I worried how he would cope. Work had been his main focus for the past 50 years. He didn't fare well being left to dwell on his own thoughts. He was born to keep busy. Our youngest Connie suggested he take up a new hobby. Golf, gardening, tinkering around with old cars. I knew she meant well, but I also knew these hobbies wouldn't stick. The only thing that could keep my husband's interest other than work was nature, and more precisely, being in it. For our retirement present, our 3 children arranged for us to stay at a glass cabin in southwest Wisconsin nestled within the forest. Although a joint gift, I knew our oldest Brett was behind it. During family dinners, he mentioned how his colleague was building a rental in the forest, one made out of glass. Although Reggie groaned about the long drive, I knew he was secretly excited. He packed his bird spotting book and his binoculars. On the way there, we listened to classical music and made small talk about the weather and how I hoped Connie remembered to walk the dog. For silly matter-of-fact things that people, especially ones that had been married as long as us, said to fill the time. We arrived at the property about 4 p.m. It was well signposted, so even when the GPS lost reception, we still managed to find it easily enough. Today's generation relied too much on technology and less on their surroundings. Us oldies knew how to navigate without that. We parked in the designated parking spot, a 5-minute walk along the dirt path to the cabin. Brett had assured us it was an easy walk. My husband wasn't good on his feet anymore. On the way, Reggie seemed to get some sort of recollection in his eyes. He looked at me and he said, "I've been around these parts before. Back when I was a boy, I saw something. Something I can't have seen. It doesn't matter." I didn't probe him for more information. I loved my husband, but he could be a bore sometimes, especially with his stories from the past. As soon as the sights and sounds of the outside world vanished behind a mask of green and we caught a glimpse of that cabin, even Reggie gasped. It was a reaction he then tried to conceal as a cough. It really was something. Wooden frames elevated the cabin that was intricately formed out of glass panes. The roof sloped at an angle and there was a balcony leading out of the living room. The lockbox was easy enough to use even for us oldies. Inside, scents of cedar and musk welcomed us in. Reggie pulled his binoculars out and rushed off to the balcony. I found a welcome basket in the kitchen and searched through it, finding candy raisins, a bottle of Merlot, a postcard, and a small gray wolf plushie. I laughed at such a thing and immediately went to show Reggie. He snickered and commented how we could give it to the grandkids if our children ever hurried up and gave us any. After that, I left Reggie to it and instead unpacked, prepared a pasta bake, and read through the information pack, pausing every now and then to admire this view. The lights in the cabin had come on as soon as we'd stepped inside, and we couldn't work out how to turn them off. I couldn't find anything about this, but something else in the pack caught my eye, so I took it outside to show Reggie. "We have to lock the doors to keep the wolves out," I told him, his attention on an American robin perching on the railing in front of him. "Reggie, make sure you lock the doors behind you." He muttered something back, but I sighed, and I reminded myself to double-check the doors later on. I checked on dinner and then sat down and did my crossword puzzle, a boring slice of normality in a peaceful place. It began uneventfully, just as it was meant to be. If only it had stayed that way. If only it had remained a perfect getaway instead of turning into a tribulation. I had the chance to leave. It was Reggie who wanted to. He came inside with a look of dread in his eyes and he said, "Aggie, I think we should go now, before it gets too dark." I shook my head. I told him he was being ridiculous. We couldn't just leave. We were here for the next 2 nights. This was a gift from our children. Leaving would be as good as throwing their kindness in their faces. Reggie gave a single nod and muttered something about staying if I insisted, and then perched on the edge of the armchair and stared out at the trees. I should have known that something was wrong, but instead I thought he was just being difficult for the sake of it. I went into the kitchen to avoid him and stared into the oven. I was furious and knew that staying out of his way until I calmed down was for the best. As I watched the cheese turn golden brown, I felt myself begin to simmer. This was my vacation too. I wasn't going to let my grumpy old husband ruin it. I took the wine out of the gift basket, poured 2 glasses, and looking around the corner of the kitchen said to my husband, "I poured you one wine." He hadn't moved from the armchair and he was staring through his binoculars, his arms rigid. "Reggie, wine," I said, placing it on the side table. He waved his arm so frantically that he knocked the wine off the table, the red liquid sloshing onto the wooden floor. I sighed at him, but as I went to leave to get a mop, he grabbed my wrist and lowering his binoculars hissed, "Aggie, there's something out there." He pointed at the trees, distracted by something visible without his binoculars. I followed his gaze, curiosity taking over my need to clean up his mess. I saw something. A shadowy figure darted through the trees until I couldn't see it at all. It was probably just a wolf. I forced a smile and disappeared into the kitchen. Or kids messing about. I knew it wasn't a wolf. Wolves don't lurk on their hind legs. It wasn't kids either. They didn't move like that or soar that high. I told myself it was a trick of the transitioning sky, but in my heart I knew something was out there. I just wasn't ready to believe it. I tried to shake off my concerns as I cleaned up that mess and I plated the food. I called Reggie to the table. I poured him a fresh glass of wine. And we sat there, eating in silence as the skies darkened around us. The forest looked different at night. It didn't seem so welcoming anymore. Instead, it felt as though it was closing in around us, constricting us like a snake would its prey. Reggie felt it too. He didn't say a word during dinner. He kept those darn binoculars around his neck. I bought him night vision ones so he could spy on owls, something I now regretted. I feared he would be up all night imagining all sorts. He was staring through the glass windows as I cleared up. I scrubbed at that dish, taking my frustrations out on it as I muttered to myself. The sound seemed to echo through the glass. A loud howl. A howl that seemed to alter as it transitioned into a haunting scream. I looked at my husband, hoping he would offer me reassurance. He fiddled with the binocular cord as he bowed his head and said, "We should have left earlier. It's their time now." He got up and walked back to the armchair. I didn't ask him what he meant by this. I just grabbed my wine and followed him. I didn't want to be alone. I sat opposite to him and stared out of that constant glass as I took a large sip. The more I stared through it, the more I realized that the lights we couldn't figure out how to turn off illuminated us in a warm glow. We were currently on show for whatever was out there looking behind the trees to see. The howls that changed into human screams continued. Some sounded far away, others so close they may as well have been in the cabin. I stared forward out onto the balcony and the trees beyond it. The shadows seemed to dance out there, and through the darkness, that's when I saw them. A pair of glowing amber eyes. They were staring straight at me, a sinister stare as though they were trying to seek out my soul. I pulled on Reggie's arm and I shakily pointed at what I was seeing. He lifted his binoculars to look, but he didn't need them. He could see the eyes, too. Glowing eyes on the face of something far from human. Something that seemed to stand tall like the trees. I gripped onto him, my terror ruling out. As the eyes faded into the night, the rattling started. It took me a moment to realize where it was coming from. My ears were prickling at the sounds. I echoed from one spot to another. Then I gulped in dread on realizing what it was. The windows and doors. That thing was trying to get inside the cabin. I looked around me, seeing only shadows out there beyond the glass. Gnarled branches danced and darkness shifted, masking the truth with its trickery. Looking at Reggie, I asked him, "The balcony door, did you lock it?" "Of course I did," he snapped back at me. But I could tell from his fidgeting fingers that he was lying. He couldn't remember if he had or not. As the rattling sound stopped, we clung onto each other as we walked from room to room, checking the windows and the doors. Nowhere was private in this house of glass. Even the bathroom looked out into the forest. We were exposed for all evils to see. Reggie held onto my hand, so we remained linked as he checked the balcony door. I could feel his shaking transfer into mine. I watched him gasp when he realized that he hadn't locked it. He desperately used his aged fingers to turn the latch. Something smacked into the glass door with a thud. He jerked back with such force that he toppled to his knees and took me with him. We looked through that window, hearts frantic, fear raging, and a stream of red dripping down the pane. Reggie fumbled to lift his binoculars and flicked the night vision on so he could see what had made that noise. He dropped them almost immediately, letting them swing around his neck. I grabbed them before he could stop me and I looked. Seeing a severed human arm, chunks taken out of it, the fingers curled, fingers that under the night vision's slime green glow, I saw a twitch. I dropped the binoculars, causing them to hit Reggie on the chin. I apologized repeatedly as I fell into his arms. He squeezed my hand and whispered to me, "Aggie, it's all right. It'll be all right." He told me to follow him and stay close. We crawled across the wooden floor, aware of each creak. My joints ached. I was too old to be doing this, and so was Reggie, but we crawled into the bedroom. He pulled the bed cover from the bed and held onto it as we made it into the kitchen, hiding in the curve of the kitchen worktops. It was the only part that had some sort of coverage from the glass. He threw the bed cover over us, our own man-made tent from the horrors. Then he took my hands in his and we stayed like that, two old terrified people who, despite our flaws, loved each other unconditionally. We stayed there stewing in our own fear. All sounds now a threat, the unknown, terrifying. Remembering what he said before, I asked him what he'd seen as a boy. He shuffled his position and then whispered, "I was in Wisconsin or Michigan. Something was watching me from the trees. Something giant in stature, part dog, part human. But I buried that memory. A memory I don't remember fully and I'm still not sure was real." "Reggie, I think it was real." I rubbed his arm. He muttered, maybe." We stayed like that all night, hidden beneath the bed cover, sweating and uncomfortable, joints aching as we flinched at each howl and rattle. As morning arrived, I didn't quite believe it. Reggie seemed to have a calmness about him as he removed the bed cover and gestured for me to follow him. We couldn't stay there for another night, trapped like ants beneath a glass. We had to leave while we had a chance. We cuddled together as we walked along the dirt path. We didn't say anything, but his racing heart said it all, as did mine. The insect chirps and bird calls filled the trees, but through the familiarity of these sounds I felt anything but safe. Each twig snap and leaf rustle made me twitch, but Reggie kept a firm hold of me as he guided me forward. As we rounded the corner and I glimpsed the thinning trees and the deep red of the car, I cried in relief. We rushed toward it. Reggie let go of me to retrieve the key from his pocket. Only as we emerged from the trees, we saw something wasn't right. A smashed windshield, shards of blood-tinted glass scattered across the hood. Through my distraught gasps, Reggie gestured for me to stay back as he hesitantly stepped forward, his binoculars raised as a weapon. He looked inside the car. I looked too, not wanting to see what he saw, but knowing I must. There were two out-of-place things on the front passenger seat. A small gray wolf plushie soaked in blood. And positioned to look like it was stroking it was a freshly chewed-off hand. I screamed and dropped to my knees through sheer horror. Reggie growled at me, "Stupid woman, I told you not to look," and he rushed to wrap me in his arms in comfort. We couldn't call the police, there's no reception out here. We couldn't stay there either. I felt the forest watching us, toying with us. We couldn't just sit there and wait for it to strike. Reggie used a branch to swipe the hand of wolf plushie out of the car. He sat on a blanket I kept in the trunk and I went in the back. I sighed in relief when the ignition turned on and we drove away from that cursed place. In the distance, we both heard it. A far-off howl that changed into a scream. A haunting human scream. Reggie turned the radio on, and as he did his best to hum along to the classic song playing, I heard the shakiness in his voice. I knew however placid he seemed, what we'd gone through in that cabin had left its mark on him. And on me. On returning home, the Coopers contacted their oldest son, Brett, who in turn called the cabin owner and recalled his parents' series of events. The owner insisted they check the cabin themselves and that no traces of blood or severed limbs were discovered. However, the cabin was immediately unlisted and is now allegedly only used by the owners as a vacation property. There have been many reported sightings of the Dogman across Michigan and Wisconsin. Many believe that they appear in cycles and that years ended in 7 hold significance. It is unknown why the Dogman chose to torment the Coopers that night. Perhaps it was a case of wrong place, wrong time, or maybe it linked back to the childhood sightings Reggie had buried in his memories. Reggie and Agatha Cooper maintain they know what they saw. The blood-stained car interior proves that something harrowing happened that night they stayed in that deserted glass cabin.